Hi class, welcome to our video lesson on 2-3 conditional statements. Here's what a conditional statement is. It is a statement that can be written in if-then form. So these two words, if and then, are going to be in every conditional statement. You maybe heard your parents say conditional statements before. They'll say, if you do this, then you can do this. If you clean your room, then you can go to the movies with your friends. I say this to my young children a lot. If you eat all your vegetables, then you could have dessert after the meal. So conditional statements are said all the time. If something happens, then something else happens. And that is what a conditional statement is. And it's written, the symbolism is in this form. So the if part, we call that statement the P statement. And then this arrow is like the then part. Then Q happens. So if P, then Q. And you're going to see that symbolism quite a bit today. So here is an example, and we're going to use this example several times today. So kind of get used to this example. If an angle's measure is less than 90 degrees, then it is acute. So it's a conditional statement. Every conditional statement starts with if, and then you're going to have a comma in every conditional statement, and then you're going to have a then at the second half of every conditional statement. The part that directly follows the if is called the hypothesis. So this, an angle's measure is less than 90 degrees, is called the hypothesis of the conditional statement. And that again is your P statement. Your Q statement is called the conclusion, and that's the part that directly follows the then. So the hypothesis goes from right after the if to the comma, and the conclusion is the part that starts right after then, and it goes till the end of the sentence. Okay, so that's what that's called. So let's talk about this for a second. If an angle's measure is less than 90 degrees, then it is acute. Is this a true statement or is this a false statement? We're going to talk about the truth value of this. It's true in most cases. If it's false in one case, then the whole statement is false. So if an angle's measure is less than 90 degrees, then it is acute. Well, an 89-degree angle is acute, an 80-degree angle is acute, a 50-degree angle is acute, a 30-degree angle. All those are acute, and they're all less than 90. However, the definition of acute angle is that the acute angle has to be less than 90 degrees, but it has to be greater than 0 degrees. So there's one instance, if an angle's measure is 0 degrees, it's not acute, but it is less than 90. So we would say that this truth value is false, because if you have a 0-degree angle, we wouldn't call it acute, but yet it's still less than 90 degrees. So the statement is false. Okay? We're going to be using this conditional statement like 3 or 4 more times today. Okay? So now that we have the conditional statement, it's written in if-then form, if P, then Q. Talk about the parts of a conditional statement. We already kind of talked about this, but the if part is the part of the conditional statement that is called the hypothesis. So the part directly following the if till the comma is called the hypothesis. The then part is called the conclusion. Okay? So in a conditional statement, right after the then to the end of the sentence, that's called the conclusion. So every conditional statement has a hypothesis and a conclusion. It has an if part and a then part. So now we're going to talk about the converse. So hopefully this symbolism helps. Instead of if P then Q, we're going to switch around the hypothesis and conclusion. So it's going to be if Q, then P. So my conditional statement that we used on the slide previous was this. If an angle's measure is less than 90 degrees, then it is acute. So the first part is called the hypothesis. It's the P part of the sentence. And this part over here is called the Q part of the sentence. So what the converse is we're going to switch this around. So Q is going to come first, and the P is going to come after. So we'll keep if right where it is. We'll keep then right where it is. And then we're just going to switch around the hypothesis and conclusion. So here it is. It's going to be if an angle's measure is acute, then its measure is less than 90 degrees. And that's what you're going to write down on your notes. If an angle's measure is acute, you can see how this is the Q part, and now it's going to come after the if. So now this is the new hypothesis. Then this part that was the hypothesis now goes to the back of the sentence and it becomes the conclusion. Then its measure is less than 90 degrees. So for all of these, we're going to talk about the truth value as well. If an angle is acute, which means less than 90 but greater than 0, then its measure is less than 90 degrees. This statement would be true. If an angle is acute, it's going to be less than 90 degrees. So then, of course, the conclusion, its measure is less than 90. That is a true statement. So the conditional statement, if P then Q. The converse, you just switch around the order. If Q, then P. Next, we're going to talk about the inverse. So here's the symbolism. Remember, this symbol right here means negation, which is the opposite meaning and the opposite truth value. Oftentimes, most times, we just write the word not in there. So the conditional statement is if P, then Q. The inverse is if not P, then, the arrow means then, not Q. So our conditional statement was right here, right? So our inverse statement, if an angle's measure is not less than 90 degrees, then it is not acute. That's going to be the inverse. So that's what you're going to write down in your notes. If an angle's measure is not less than 90 degrees, then it is not acute. So now we'll talk about the truth value of this as well. So if an angle measure is not less than 90, which means it's going to be greater than 90, then it is not acute. Well, if it's greater than 90, then of course the angle won't be acute. So this is another true statement. So the conditional statement has its own truth value, the converse has its own truth value, the inverse has its own truth value. And the inverse, you keep the P statement right where it is, you keep the Q statement right where it is, but the difference is that you put nots on both the hypothesis and the conclusion, on the if and the then part. So there's your inverse. So now we are on our last part of this, the contrapositive. Is kind of a mixture of the converse and the inverse. You switch around the order, and you also negate both parts. So our conditional statement is if P, then Q. So the contrapositive, the hypothesis is going to go to the back of the sentence. The conclusion is going to go to the front of the sentence. So if Q, then P. And not only that, you're also going to negate both parts of the sentence. So you're going to put nots on both parts. That's what that squiggly means again. If not Q, then not P. So here's what we have. We have our conditional statement. But now this part is going to come first. So if an angle measure is not acute, that's going to come first, then it is not less than 90 degrees. And that's what we're going to write right here. So if an angle is not acute, then its measure is not less than 90 degrees. You can see how the Q statement came first with a not on it, and the if part, the hypothesis, came second, also with a not on it. So now, talking about the truth value of this one, if an angle is not acute, then its measure is not less than 90 degrees, which happens in most cases. If an angle is not acute, that means, it's going to be oftentimes greater than 90, except we have that one case if it's a 0-degree angle. A 0-degree angle is not acute, however, its measure is less than 90 degrees. So this one is false in one instance. If it's false in one instance, then we have to say that the whole contrapositive statement is false. So that is the conditional statement. Just to summarize, the conditional statement is if P, then Q. And that is the conditional statement. So the converse is the opposite order. Q comes first, then P. The inverse is where you still have P, then Q. However, it is if not P, then not Q. So you put nots on both the conditional and or on the hypothesis and the conclusion. And then the contrapositive is going to be Q comes first, then P comes second, and you put nots on both of them. So if not Q, then not P. That's kind of a summary of the last 5 or 6 slides. All right, we'll finish with this. Write the following statement as a conditional statement, which means in if-then form. Write the conditional, then identify the hypothesis and the conclusion. So a 5-sided polygon is a pentagon. So we want to write this in if-then form. So if a figure has 5 sides, or if a polygon has 5 sides, then it is a pentagon. So you're going to kind of almost read it, and in the same order, like this is kind of the P statement, and this is the Q statement. The P statement comes first, the Q statement comes second. So if, every conditional statement starts with if a polygon has 5 sides, comma, then, every conditional statement has a then it is a pentagon. Why don't you guys try this part on your own and see what you could come up with for an if-then statement, a conditional statement. Pause the video, please, and try that on your own. All equilateral triangles have 3 congruent sides, so it's going to start with the word if. If a figure is an equilateral triangle, this is the hypothesis part, then it will have 3 congruent sides. This is the conclusion part. So here's the P and the Q. Hopefully those things made sense to you. We're going to do more work with that tomorrow. If you have any questions, by all means, please ask me at that time.